So let's apply all these concepts to Hurricane Katrina. Like most hurricanes in the northern hemisphere in the Atlantic Ocean, they originate off the coast of Africa. And so these low-pressure centers originate actually there in the equatorial low-pressure trough that we find there just south of that persistent dominant high pressure that we find over the Sahara Desert. This, combined with the upper-level winds, plays a key role in understanding the general bend to the right of hurricanes in the United States. And so one of the characteristics of sometimes with hurricanes is the fact that as this hurricane spins, counterclockwise keep in mind, the upper level winds do a good job of protecting the interior, or essentially New Orleans, in this case of Hurricane Katrina, from hurricanes approaching. Now we see a much different situation. Once again, the upper level winds, the jet stream, they meander, and so we can have a different meander in which now, in this case, this low pressure, extreme low pressure hurricane can actually penetrate a little bit deeper, and once it penetrates a little deeper, it then can go over the extremely warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The waters of the Gulf of Mexico are extremely warm because they're shallower than the deeper waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And so the shallow end of the pool, as you note, in the summertime is going to be warmer than the deeper end. And so as that hurricane then now comes over into the Gulf of Mexico, it essentially becomes even more intense, which is a key to understanding Hurricane Katrina. Here's the general path of Hurricane Katrina. So it originated, became a hurricane over the Bahamas, worked its way towards the Atlantic side of Florida. However, then because the upper level winds moved, it then allowed it to be penetrated deeper into the Gulf of Mexico, where it then went over the Everglades, which is essentially warm water that's on the surface, which, although it's land, is quite warm and wet, which helped to intensify the hurricane. But then once it got over the very shallow, comparatively, waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it really intensified, showcased by that red color, which is measuring strength. So the red color illustrates the strongest point of this hurricane. Here we can see the massive size of Hurricane Katrina, and so you can see to the left of the eye, Louisiana, to the north, Mississippi, and to the right, Alabama and Florida. And so deep within Alabama and Georgia, and even in Tennessee, as the Hurricane Katrina was making the eye of it was making landfall there in the southern part of this map, to the north, there actually were tornadoes being spawned in those dense rain bands that were found further away from the eye. This illustrates, as we zoom into Hurricane Katrina and zoom into the eye, this illustrates the right front quadrant in which the winds were the most severe. If we look to the left front quadrant is where we'll find New Orleans. And so actually New Orleans didn't have the most intense amount of wind when the hurricane came through. So the winds were the strongest actually over there in Mississippi and close to Mobile, Alabama, in the right front quadrant of Hurricane Katrina. Here's an image that showcases a storm surge in which the normal tide is far surpassed by the surge created by this low pressure that's bringing with it a ton of amount of water that is then going to then, of course, flood areas that are just above mean sea level. This here is absolutely critical for explaining why Hurricane Katrina was so deadly, what created that storm surge. Here we have an interesting situation where New Orleans is actually on the southern side of Lake Pontchartrain. And so this is kind of a lake, but it's kind of a mix between an ocean and a freshwater lake. It's what we call brackish water. And one of the things, if you note, that line coming from north to south through Lake Pontchartrain, that's about a 35-minute long trip across that road, showcasing how big this lake is. But New Orleans is found on the southern side of this lake. So if I put this hurricane in motion, what happened is the eye actually was just east of New Orleans, which is the worst case scenario for New Orleans. They would actually be better off if that eye went directly over New Orleans instead of just to the east. Because if we look at this arrow here, what happened is the storm surge from actually Lake Pontchartrain is what flooded all of New Orleans, or much of New Orleans. And so the low-lying areas of New Orleans were the first places to fill. And so one of the things is this eye being to the east of New Orleans then brought with it, because of that counterclockwise spin, brought with it the water from the northern part of New Orleans, the Lake Pontchartrain storm surge, which then flooded the low-lying areas. And if you know anything about New Orleans, it's essentially under seawater and under sea level. But also the lower income individuals tend to live at the bottom of the bowls, and so the lower level areas where the few highland areas is where the wealthy people live. And so go figure who are those that were most influenced by the storm surge. That would be the lower income individuals. Here's a Doppler image. It shows the arrival of Hurricane Katrina, and we can see those dense rain bands. Before the hurricane even made contact, the eye made contact with the shore, we could see those dense rain bands leaving their effect. But the hurricane went just to the right, or to the east of that star, and that star being New Orleans. And so the storm surge was really bad for the delta area of Louisiana, but also for Mississippi. It was really, really bad. The red area illustrating where that storm surge really was the most intense. And this is just to the east of Louisiana. And so what this is showing is the storm surge where it was the most severe was actually to the right, or the east of New Orleans there in Mississippi, a little sliver of Mississippi that has access to the Gulf of Mexico.